Welcome. So you've joined us because you're interested in William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, a classic, really.
Absolutely, a foundational text.
And our goal today, our mission for this deep dive, is to sort of unpack the big ideas, give you a shortcut, maybe, to James's perspective on religious experience.
Right, hitting the main points someone would cover at, say, a college level.
Exactly. And we should probably start by saying James comes at this as a psychologist, doesn't he?
Yes, very much so. He's looking at the feelings, the impulses, the personal side of religion, not so much institutions or dogma.
And he leans heavily on firsthand accounts,
Mm.
especially from people he sees as fully self-conscious or really accomplished in their religious lives.
Those are his key sources, yes. He wants the intense, the deeply felt experiences.
Okay, so where does he start? One of the first hurdles he tackles is this idea of medical materialism.
Ah, yes. Medical materialism. It was quite prevalent then. The basic idea was trying to explain away religion by pointing to physical causes.
Like saying, oh, you're devout because you have a certain temperament, or your religious guilt is just bad nerves.
Precisely. Or even, profound religious feelings being linked to something like, well, puberty or digestion issues. James mentions B'nai Sangal trying to pathologize devout types.
And Maudsley saying all beliefs are basically physical.
Exactly. Linking belief directly to the body's state. It's a very reductionist viewpoint.
So basically boiling it all down to biology. James pushes back hard against that, right?
He does. His counterargument is quite elegant, actually. He says, well, okay, all mental states have organic conditions. Your thoughts, my thoughts, even a scientist's theories.
So even the theory of medical materialism itself has a biological origin in someone's brain.
Exactly. If you trace back any belief system, religious or atheistic, you'll find physiological roots. Nerves, brain chemistry, whatever.
So just finding a physical correlation doesn't automatically dismiss the experience itself.
Right. It doesn't invalidate the meaning or the spiritual significance or, crucially for James, how that belief actually works for the person, the practical effect it has.
Ah, okay. So origin isn't everything. If the origin doesn't tell us if it's valid, what does? What's the test?
James famously proposes the pragmatic test. By their fruits ye shall know them, not by their roots.
The outcome is what matters.
Yes. He points to the long history, especially in Christian mysticism, of trying to tell genuine divine experiences from, well, demonic counterfeits. Jonathan Edwards wrote extensively on this, on religious affections.
How do you tell the difference?
By the results. The practical consequences in a person's life and character. If the experience leads to, more love, more patience, positive changes, then its value stands, regardless of where it might seem to come from physically.
That makes sense. Judge the tree by its fruit. Okay, so moving on from that, James also dives into what we might call abnormal psychology, morbid temperaments.
He does, and it's fascinating. He believed that studying the extremes, the abnormal states like obsessions, delusions, can actually teach us a lot about how the normal mind works.
Like studying illusions helps understand vision.
Exactly, that kind of idea.
Okay.
And he saw this potential link between what he called borderland insanity, or even just intense crankiness, and genius.
Crankiness and genius, how does that work?
Well, his argument is that certain psychopathic temperaments, these really intense personalities, when they're combined with a sharp intellect, can produce incredibly impactful people.
Because they're just that more driven.
More driven, more excitable, often fixated on certain ideas. And crucially, they have this powerful urge to turn their inner thoughts into outward belief and action. They don't just have ideas, they live them.
More so than someone with a more balanced temperament.
Often, yes. He uses a quote from Annie Besant's autobiography that makes this point really well. She contrasts the sort of passive goodwill many people have with the active, almost fervent engagement of those who might seem a bit cranky or intense.
They're the ones who actually do things, take risks.
Exactly. That intensity, combined with intellect, creates momentum. They grab onto ideas, and those ideas, through them, grab onto the world. They make history, often.
Interesting. So let's get to the core, then, religious experience itself. James finds it tricky to define, doesn't he?
Oh, definitely. He's very upfront about that. Where do you draw the line between a religious feeling and, say, a profound ethical feeling, or even just a philosophical insight? He calls the boundaries misty.
So it's more of a spectrum.
Very much a spectrum, a matter of degree. And because of that fuzziness, he decides to focus on the clearest cases, the unmistakable and extreme examples.
Why the extremes?
His thinking is that by looking at the most potent, the most undeniable instances, you get a clearer picture of the fundamental nature of the thing itself. You avoid getting bogged down in borderline cases that might not even be truly religious.
Okay, so can you give an example of this contrast between an extreme case and something more ordinary?
Sure, he contrasts someone like Frederick Locker Lamson, who seems to have been a pleasant, generally decent person, but not deeply religious, with the kind of intense, all-encompassing faith described in the Theologia Germanica.
What's described there?
It's this anonymous mystic talking about completely giving up personal will, submitting entirely to eternal goodness, this feeling of profound self-abasement that somehow leads to immense joy. It's a total reaction upon life.
Very different from just being agreeable.
Worlds apart. James also makes a comparison between the active agreement with the universe in that Christian example versus the more passive agreement to the way things are in someone like Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic. There's an intensity and engagement in the religious case.
Got it. And within that intensity, he talks about religious happiness. How's that different from just, feeling good?
It's a crucial distinction for James. Religious happiness isn't just relief from suffering. It often involves actively consenting to outward evil or hardship.
Consenting to it? How?
By believing that even though things look bad externally, they're somehow overcome on a deeper inward level. He calls it a sacrificial constitution.
Sacrificial.
Think of the image of St. Michael defeating Satan. The presence of the evil, the negative principle, actually makes the triumph, the positive state, richer and more meaningful. It's not happiness despite the bad, but happiness that incorporates and overcomes it.
So the struggle itself deepens the experience.
Precisely. James notes that some saints almost seem to feed on suffering and humiliation. Their inner joy grew in proportion to their outward troubles.
That seems paradoxical to a modern view.
It certainly can. And he also points out religion isn't just about concrete things like specific gods or rituals. It's also deeply engaged with abstract concepts.
Like God's attributes, holiness, justice, mercy.
Yes, exactly. Or complex theological ideas, mysteries. These abstract things can be incredibly powerful objects of meditation and can profoundly shape a believer's life.
Even if you can't directly see or touch them.
Right. He brings in Kant here the idea that concepts like God or immortality might not have direct sensory content, but they have definite meaning for how we live, for our moral choices. We act as if they are real, and that has real consequences.
Which ties back to the fruits idea.
It does. And this leads him to another interesting concept, the reality feeling.
A feeling of reality.
Yeah.
Separate from the senses.
That's the idea. James suggests there's this fundamental sense of objective presence, something deeper or more basic than sight, sound, touch, etc.
And religious ideas tap into this?
He thinks so. When a religious concept manages to connect with this core reality feeling, it gets believed, really believed. Even if it's vague, hard to imagine, or faces logical criticism.
It just feels real on some fundamental level.
Yes, it resonates with that deeper sense of what is.
Didn't he have a personal story about this?
He did. He mentions feeling a distinct presence in a room once, couldn't see or hear anything, but the sense of something being there was undeniable, and it provoked a really strong emotion. He calls it abhorrence.
Wow. So a direct, non-sensory feeling of reality.
Exactly. And he uses that to illustrate how religious experiences can feel utterly convincing and real to the person having them, bypassing normal sensory checks.
Okay. Now, James also talks quite a bit about internal conflict, the divided self.
Yes, the sick soul. This is a major theme. He contrasts this state with the healthy-minded temperament.
What's the difference there?
The healthy-minded person, James says, kind of naturally avoids dwelling on suffering or evil. They have an optimistic bent, tend to minimize the negative side of life.
They just don't see it or choose not to.
A bit of both, perhaps. They might actively deny evil exists or just have a disposition that focuses on the good.
Whereas the sick soul, the divided self,
they feel the conflict intensely. They're acutely aware of evil, of their own internal contradictions. Think of Martin Luther struggling with temptations.
Or James mentions Henry Aline, torn between religious duty and enjoying carnal mirth.
Right, that kind of inner battle. And this state, this religious melancholy, what we might call anhedonia, loss of meaning, often drives a deep intellectual search for answers, for relief. Tolstoy's My Confession is a prime example he uses.
So the suffering itself pushes them towards deeper questions.
It absolutely can. And James stresses here that the meaning and value we find in life aren't just objective facts out there. They are, in his words, gifts of the spectator's mind, profoundly shaped by our emotions, our non-logical states, often rooted in our physical being.
Our feelings literally shape our reality.
In a very real sense, yes. Which brings us naturally to the idea of conversion. How does someone move from that divided state to a more unified one?
Right, conversion, a key part of the religious life for many. James looks at research on this, doesn't he?
He does. He mentions Professor Starbuck's work, which found, interestingly, that typical conversions in adolescence and evangelical settings showed patterns very similar to normal teenage spiritual development.
Similar ages, similar symptoms.
Oh, yes. Feelings of being incomplete, depression, anxiety, followed by a sense of release. The lines between normal growth and conversion weren't always sharp.
But James does distinguish different types of conversion.
He does. He talks about the volitional type, that's the gradual one, where someone makes a conscious effort, works towards changing their beliefs and habits.
Step-by-step process.
Kind of. But then there's the self-surrender type. That's usually much more sudden, dramatic, feels like it comes from outside oneself, maybe from the subconscious.
And that one often has bigger effects.
The effects are often more striking, yes. But James makes a key observation. Even in the gradual volitional type, there seems to need to be moments of letting go, of self-surrender, for that final unification, that real relief to happen.
You still have to give up control at some point.
Starbucks quoted as saying something like that you have to give up the personal will. That seems crucial.
Let's focus on those sudden, instantaneous conversions. Like St. Paul on the road to Damascus. They're pretty significant in some traditions.
Hugely significant, especially in Protestantism. James gives them a lot of attention. He even includes a very detailed first-person account.
What was that like?
It describes someone reading the Psalms, suddenly feeling God's presence intensely, this overwhelming wave of love and relief washing over them, a complete instantaneous shift.
How does James explain these psychologically?
He suggests they could be like eruptions from the subconscious. Ideas or emotional complexes that were building up beneath the surface suddenly break through into conscious awareness.
Almost like a psychological explosion.
That's a good way to put it. He draws parallels to things seen in hypnosis or hysteria, citing Professor Coe's work on the active subliminal self. There's something going on below the level of everyday awareness.
But does this dramatic conversion make someone inherently better or more spiritual?
That's the interesting part. James notes that, generally speaking, converts as a group don't necessarily seem morally or spiritually superior to people who arrive at faith more gradually or just grow up in it. There's no distinct splendor, as he puts it.
So the significance is maybe more psychological for the individual.
It seems that way. It's a profound personal transformation, certainly, but maybe not a sign of achieving some objectively higher spiritual rank.
And these experiences are often accompanied by intense, positive feelings.
Oh, absolutely. An ecstasy of happiness is common. He uses President Finney's account, feeling Christ's presence directly, this mighty baptism of the Holy Ghost. Very powerful, overwhelming joy.
Okay. Shifting slightly, James also looks at how strong emotions work. And this relates to the mind cure movement he discusses.
Yes, he observes how intense passions like religious fervor can push aside normal inhibitions, normal ways of thinking and feeling.
They just take over.
They can, yes. And he sees the mind cure movement, which was popular then, partly as a reaction against a kind of religion focused on anxiety and guilt.
The religion of chronic anxiety, he calls it.
Right. Mind cure offered an alternative. Deliberately cultivate a positive, healthy-minded attitude. Believe you can overcome fear, worry, even physical illness, by focusing on the good.
What was the core belief there?
A belief in a universal, positive force, a spirit of infinite life and power, often identified with God, that you could tap into.
And how did you tap into it?
Through what James calls an anti-moralistic method. It wasn't about striving and effort in the usual sense. It was about surrender, passivity, letting go of worry and personal responsibility, trusting the universal power.
So let go and let God, essentially, and good things would follow.
That was the idea. Relief from anxiety, better health, even material well-being, supposedly.
But Joey saw limits to this approach, didn't he? Especially for the sick souls.
He did. He felt that the purely healthy-minded view, the mind cure approach, couldn't really grapple with the deep sense of evil and suffering that people like Bunyan or Tolstoy experienced. Their reality was just darker, more complex.
Their world had a basement level of suffering that Mind Cure ignored.
Something like that. Their redemption, their faith, had to incorporate that darkness. James says their universe was 2 stories deep, and sadness remained a part, even if a minor one, of their ultimate faith. It wasn't just wished away.
Okay, so assuming someone attains this faith state, whether through conversion or gradual growth, what are the results, the fruits, as he calls them?
He points to several key outcomes. One is often an increase in charity, in love, and compassion towards others.
A positive emotional shift outward.
Yes, and also inward, a sense of deep tranquility, safety, resilience. The feeling that whatever happens externally, you're fundamentally okay. That God's will be done, feeling, even amidst
A
difficulties.
sense of peace. What about behaviors? He talks about asceticism, too.
He does. Asceticism, self-denial, mortification. He acknowledges that from a modern standpoint, some historical examples look extreme, maybe even pathological.
Like wearing hair shirts or extreme fasting.
Right. He gives examples like Suso's self-inflicted pain or Louis of Gonzaga's intense detachment from worldly things. But he also explores the motivations.
Which were?
Things like imitating Christ's suffering, seeking humility, practicing obedience, breaking the hold of bodily desires to achieve spiritual freedom.
And poverty often fits in here, too.
Yes, the idealization of poverty is common across traditions. Hindu fakirs, Buddhist monks, Christian mendicant orders. It's seen as freedom from worldly cares, a way to depend solely on a higher power.
But James also warns about taking these virtues too far, right? Even saintliness can go wrong.
Absolutely. He's very clear that even the best qualities can become corrupted by excess. Common sense has to be the judge, ultimately.
So how can saintliness become excessive?
James suggests that sometimes apparent extravagance in saints might stem from a relative lack of intellectual balance. The spiritual excitement isn't checked by reason, perhaps, and takes on forms that look pathological.
You give an example.
He mentions figures like Margaret Mary Alacoque, known for intense visions and revelations about the Sacred Heart, or acts of extreme obedience like those attributed to Sister Marie Claire, things that push the boundaries of common sense.
And these excesses can have downsides.
Definitely. Things like becoming withdrawn from society, overly critical, maybe just impractical in daily life. There's a potential danger.
But he also saw value in this kind of strenuous life, didn't he? He talked about a moral equivalent of war.
Yes, that's a famous phrase. He was looking for ways to channel that human need for heroism, discipline, and strenuous effort into something constructive, not destructive like war.
And voluntary poverty could be one such equivalent.
He suggests it might be. A way to live intensely, heroically, but focused on spiritual goals rather than conquest or material gain.
Okay, this seems like a good point to shift towards mysticism, which James considers a distinct category of experience.
Yes, mysticism is central to his analysis. He tries to pin down its core characteristics.
What are they?
He identifies 4 key marks. First, ineffability, the experience defies adequate description in words. Second, a noetic quality. It feels like a state of knowledge, an insight into deep truths, even if it's hard to articulate.
So you feel you've learned something profound.
Exactly. Third is transiency. These states usually don't last long. And fourth is passivity. The mystic often feels like their own will is in abeyance, like they're being grasped or held by a superior power.
Can you give some examples of what he considered mystical consciousness?
He uses examples like Charles Kingsley's feeling of hidden meaning behind nature. He even discusses experiences under nitrous oxide laughing gas.
Really? Laughing gas mysticism.
James experimented with it himself. He felt it induced a profound, though brief, sense of reconciliation and understanding of opposites. He cites Benjamin Paul Blood's anesthetic revelation, too, a deep insight into unity, but often unemotional.
Just a sense of knowing.
Yes, a cognitive insight. Then there's cosmic consciousness, this feeling of being one with the universe, with all of existence.
Or like Walt Whitman's poetry.
Whitman is a key example for James here. Also, Richard Murray Spuck wrote specifically about this state. It's a sense of the interconnectedness of everything, often accompanied by intense joy.
And for the person experiencing it, this mystical state feels authoritative.
Absolutely. James emphasizes that for the individual having the experience, it carries its own authority, a sense of direct knowledge that can feel more real and compelling than ordinary rational thought. It challenges the idea that our normal waking consciousness is the only valid type.
So how does all this personal experience relate to more organized religion, to theology?
Well, theology, for James, is the attempt to systematize this stuff, to create a structured knowledge about God based on these experiences and on reason.
But he sees a tension there
No.
between feeling and reason.
Yes. He draws on John Henry Newman's idea that feeling is valid for the individual experiencing it, while reason tries to establish truths that are universally valid.
And which one wins out in religion?
James argues that historically, philosophical theology, trying to prove God's existence through pure reason alone, hasn't really succeeded in creating universal agreement. It tends to form different schools and sects, just like religions based more purely on feeling or mystical experience do.
So reason doesn't settle the arguments definitively.
It seems not. He lists the traditional arguments and attributes of God from philosophical theology: first cause, necessary being, absolute, one, spiritual, simple, etc., but notes they don't compel universal belief.
What about other philosophical approaches,
hmm
like idealism?
He discusses idealistic philosophy, like the work of Edward Caird, which tries to bridge the gap by suggesting God is a kind of universal consciousness that includes our own. But again, it doesn't achieve universal assent.
So what's the alternative? If pure reason fails, how can we study religion systematically?
James suggests a science of religions could be possible, but it would need to be grounded differently. It should start with the actual personal religious experiences people have.
The raw data.
Exactly. And constantly check its theories and conclusions against that lived experience. It has to stay connected to the phenomena.
And what's the core belief that makes religion genuine in this view?
James argues that the heart of genuine religion is the belief that something real is happening when someone prays or enters that prayerful state of consciousness. There's a real transaction occurring.
Even if people disagree fiercely about what that something is.
Precisely. The belief in the reality of the interaction is key.
Thinking of prayer, he looks at that in detail too, doesn't he? Using a specific case study.
Yes, the case of George Mueller, who ran orphanages in Bristol purely on the basis of petitionary prayer. He never asked for money directly, just prayed for provisions and believed God provided.
An extreme example of faith in prayer's effectiveness.
Very much so. Mueller saw his life's work as a demonstration of God's faithfulness in answering prayer.
How does James analyze prayer from his psychological perspective? Does he think something is happening?
He suggests that prayer involves opening ourselves up to something more, perhaps within our own psyche. He connects it to the subconscious mind, drawing on F.W.H. Meyer's concept of the subliminal consciousness.
So prayer might be accessing deeper parts of ourselves.
That's one interpretation he explores. This communion, perhaps involving influences from the subconscious, could genuinely boost our personal energy, lead to regenerative effects, make us feel stronger, more whole.
And could there be something beyond just our own subconscious?
He leaves that door open. He hypothesizes about a wider world of being that might exert intermittent influence on us, with the subconscious mind being the potential access point, the subliminal door through which these influences might enter. It's speculative, but connects to the experiences people report.
Interesting. What about more dramatic things like visions and voices? Many religious figures report those.
Yes, James acknowledges that saints, prophets, reformers throughout history have often reported visions, voices, rapturous states. These often seem linked to a heightened sensibility.
Aren't these just hallucinations then?
He discusses them as automatisms or sensory experiences that seem to come from beyond the person's ordinary conscious control. They might originate in the subconscious or perhaps elsewhere. But importantly, these experiences often powerfully reinforce the person's religious beliefs.
They feel like direct communication or confirmation.
Exactly. He gives examples from different traditions, the revelations Muhammad received for the Quran, Joseph Smith's experiences in Mormonism, or someone like Margaret Mary Alacoque's visions of the Sacred Heart in Catholicism. These sensory events play a significant role.
So James covers a huge range, from subtle feelings to dramatic visions.
An immense range. That's the whole point of Varieties.
Well, this has certainly been a thorough exploration of the big themes in James's Varieties of religious experience. We've touched on his psychological approach, his focus on individual feeling.
Right, and that pragmatic emphasis on the practical results, the fruits of belief, rather than just the origins or roots.
It really highlights the diversity, the intensity, and the deeply personal nature of these experiences he documented.
It absolutely does.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe final thought to leave with everyone. Given everything James lays out, this vast spectrum of intensely personal, often ineffable experiences, what does that really imply about our ability to, truly understand, let alone judge someone else's spiritual life?
That's a challenging question. It really pushes you to think about the subjective depths and the sheer variety of faith.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this exploration.